I suspect that our beloved friend Baroness Nicholson suggested I address this because she chairs, as we all know, the House of Lords Select Committee on Sexual Violence in Conflict. This committee's recent report sheds light on a tragic problem that has for a very long time been largely an invisible part of war and conflict. As early as the beginning of the 5th century AD, rape in wartime was considered an ancient and customary evil, according to St. Augustine. In the intervening centuries, such customary evil has only grown more familiar and more prevalent. As the report notes, and I quote, "The brutality of the crime is staggering. It includes severe physical and psychological trauma, HIV infection, and too often death. Women and children are at particular risk of further harm through displacement, pregnancy, forced marriage, or honor killing. Survivors may be cast out by their families. They rarely receive justice, and it is believed that most victims do not even report their attacks." Close quote. The crime of sexual violence is compounded by the other violations victims suffer during war. They lose homes, health care, income, husbands, children, and hope. Their very identity becomes as tattered as the landscape around them. And yet I emphasize at the outset the observation that women may be victimized and yet remain active agents, deserving of respect and not simply pity. In that spirit, I make these remarks with the utmost respect for the women who have or will yet suffer such atrocities. Additional income is being paid to this matter. To its credit, the United Nations in 2008 recognized that sexual violence has been used as a tactic of war to humiliate, dominate, instill fear, diverse, or forcibly relocate civilian members of a community. That body's Security Council went on to say that in times of armed conflict, there must be an immediate and complete cessation by all parties of all acts of sexual violence against civilians, noting that rape and other forms of sexual violence can constitute war crimes, crimes against humanity, or a constitutive act with respect to genocide. Yet they continue. In Sierra Leone's decade-long conflict, it's estimated that people committed between 50,000 and 65,000 incidents of war-related sexual violence against internally displaced women. In Rwanda's ethnic conflict, about which we've heard in this conference, between 1990 and 1994, it was estimated that the number of female rape victims totaled somewhere between 250,000 and 500,000. With most victims being between 16 and 26 years of age, although there were girls as young as 2 who suffered abuse. It is now estimated that 70% of the surviving women are HIV positive with little or no access to adequate medical assistance. Unfortunately, violence toward women is not limited to times of war. Instances of female genital mutilation, removable of bodily appendages, and honor killings persist during times of peace. Women are also exploited by pornography, sex trafficking, baby farming, and slavery operations. Figures by the U.S. Department of State from 2003 suggest that between 800,000 and 900,000 people are trafficked across international borders every year. More than 49 million people are now forcibly displaced as a result of conflict and persecution. About half of them are women. 2/3 of them have been in exile for more than 5 years. Statistics like these give only numbers, and they cannot tell of shattered lives. They cannot tell of broken health. They cannot tell of fractured families or of the individuals affected. Surely God knows of their suffering and weeps with them. As Isaiah lamented, "Therefore said I, look away from me. I weep bitterly. Labor not to comfort me because of the spoiling of the daughter of my people. I bear witness of God's love for those who suffer some of the worst that this world has to offer. As religious communities and individuals, we need to demonstrate God's love for them by reaching out with compassion, sensitivity, and understanding to women who have endured so much. Even as I say that, we realize that some religious communities and congregations have themselves been a potent source of misogyny and have allowed or even sometimes perpetuated tragic examples of abuse, including sexual abuse. As a man of faith, I do not stand with those who say God sanctions violence against or subjugation of women. Fortunately, those who do believe that are an exception and not the rule among most faith-based groups and their leaders. Members of our faith, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, have been encouraged to assist refugees in their own communities, and collectively we've been working for decades to support refugees in any part of the world in which they are found. One small example of this is when we partnered with Amar to provide sewing machines and fabric to camps in northern Iraq, serving 16,000 internally displaced people, many of whom are Yazidis, about whose plight we have so movingly heard here at this conference. These gifts made it possible for the Yazidi women in the camps to obtain clothing because the traditional design and religious significance of the dresses they wear were impossible to obtain otherwise. One of the many innovative ideas that Baroness Nicholson has put on display at this conference is the idea, to which Sir Malcolm has just spoken, that religion and religious persecution, and by implication religious freedom, need to be more closely examined in their relationship to all of the issues that we are discussing. This includes her crucial work on the topic of sexual violence in conflict. During a recent visit to the United States, in which Emma spoke at the University of Virginia, Yale University, and Princeton University, she was, with two commissioners of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, part of a very public conversation on this subject. That conversation examined and applauded Amar's important religious tolerance initiative. Emma, we love you dearly. Allow me for a moment to discuss religious freedom as a means of preventing conflict and violence, especially to women. First, we need to remember that just what religious belief is. That's subject to some definition, but it should answer the basic question of the human experience. Who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? What is required of me? These questions emanate from the human soul's yearning desire to understand the very purpose of one's life. That is why a religious right is a human right. A human being must be permitted to find meaning in their life and for their life. For the vast majority of individuals on this planet, that involves searching out, investigating, adopting, and, when necessary, adapting religious belief. The freedom to search for meaning in life and to believe that a higher power has provided that meaning surely belongs to women as much as to men. Indeed, this is one of the most important freedoms a woman can have in any society, where cultural traditions might seek to impose upon her a lesser conception of herself and a lesser conception of her value. Religious freedom is the very foundation of anything that could be called empowerment. Harvard economist and Nobel laureate Amartya Sen has argued that societal development requires the removal of sources of unfreedom. Recent research by Brian Grimm and Roger Fink indicates that these impediments to and restrictions on religious freedom lead to increased social hostility over religion. Grimm specifically describes what he calls the religious violence cycle, where societal restriction on religion leads to governmental restriction on religion, which together increase social violence toward religion and from religious groups towards society, prompting in turn more restrictions on religious freedom. Obviously, the religious violence cycle is a vicious one as well, literally. The counterpart to the cycle of religious violence is what these two scholars call the religious freedom cycle. That increased religious freedom results in increased participation by religions and religious individuals in society, which in turn leads to positive contributions of those values to that community. They note that religious communities are a bulwark of civil society, that high levels of religious freedom correlate in a statistically significant way with fewer incidents of armed conflict, higher levels of health and earned income, and better educational opportunities for women, as well as with such foundational rights as civil liberty and freedom of the press. Conversely, religious restrictions not only increase social violence and hostility, but also have been demonstrated to increased forced migration. This should be no surprise, inasmuch as English Puritans, French Huguenots, and some European Jews, such as those in Russia, if they had the freedom to do so, chose immigration over persecution generations ago, as have the Yazidi and other minorities surrounded by conflict areas of the Middle East this very day. We need to realize that reducing restrictions on religion, particularly when these restrictions are targeted against minorities, is one additional component in the solution to forced migration. In summary, religion, freed to contribute to community, can be a vital part of preventing conflict and the sexual violence that so often accompanies it. As John Adams, one of the founding fathers of the United States, stated, "We have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passion when it is unbridled by morality and religion." And it is women, all too often, who are the ones who suffer most from unbridled human passion, the passion that runs rampant in so many conflict situations. For added measure, David Holland offers yet other reasons why religion and religious freedom can and must be part of the solution to our current trauma. I quote, "Religion and spirituality help women and men cope with trauma by providing meaning in the face of grave loss, helping reduce anxiety, connecting victims to social support, and in a more explicitly religious way, enabling them to attain communion with the sacred." What does all of this tell us? It tells us that religion is a healing, hopeful, motivating influence, that religious rights are human rights, and that human rights are women's rights. Obviously, much remains to be done to reduce conflict and eradicate the sexual violence that accompanies it. This is a work that will require our best effort, our most thoughtful and coordinated response, our most compassionate and open hearts for a very, very long time to come. But we know that such efforts are strengthened by the determination of empowered women. Baroness Nicholson's Select Committee report says, "If women are not involved directly in peace negotiations and in delivering the peace afterwards, such efforts will be far less likely to succeed." Close quote. We need that powerful and unique female force for good. Much of that force is represented in this room today. Emma herself is a magnificent example of the very empowerment of which we speak. She has done a Herculean work in advancing this cause, and we're all indebted to her. Perhaps Nelson Mandela was thinking of someone like Emma when he stated, "As long as we take the view that these are problems for women alone to solve, we cannot expect to reverse the high incidence of rape and child abuse. Domestic violence will not be eradicated. We will not defeat this scourge that affects each and every one of us until we succeed in mobilizing the whole of our society to fight it. That's what this conference is hoping to do. May God bless us to succeed. Thank you.